Welcome to Scaling Right with Artha School of Entrepreneurship. I'm Mangalam Maloo, and this is a podcast where we talk to founders about building sustainable companies and the many roads to reach there. The story of every company starts with a dream the founder or the founder team has. Call it their idea of ambition. The idea then finds many believers: customers, team, partners, investors, and many more. As the company grows, it's the idea that shape-shifts and expands manifold. But not every bend in the road is known or can be predicted. As life, that means taking quick decisions with often imperfect information. So today we'll explore the stories and experiences of founders who've navigated the delicate balance between reaching for the stars and facing the tough decisions that come with growth. We'll uncover the 2 a.m. dilemmas that kept them awake, the risks they took, and the lessons that they carry forward. And I'm pretty excited because to chat with me about this, we have with us, and we're very lucky to have with us, Naiyya Saggi, who's the co-founder of the Good Glamm Group and the founder of BabyChakra. Naiyya, always a pleasure speaking to you, and thank you so much for joining us.
No, thanks, Mangalam. It's completely my pleasure.
Well, we're talking about all these crazy 2 a.m. decisions, gut, and how things happen, etc. But the biggest decision is to actually, have the germ of an idea of a business and then actually going ahead with that through your ambition. I mean, how do you define that? What was that first germ of an idea and how do you go about it?
First of all, Mangalam, you kind of already know the story, right? So I'm going to be sharing it with the folks who are listening in for the first time, as we talked about. BabyChakra came about from a very real need that I had sort of seen first. And it wasn't my need, interestingly enough. I think a lot of entrepreneurs say it was my need, so I set out to build a problem, like a solution to that problem. It really wasn't my need. I wasn't a mother when I was starting BabyChakra, right? But it was a need I saw which was very, very real. And I first experienced it firsthand when I was actually at McKinsey. I was a management consultant at McKinsey, and I was working in maternal and child health.
Wow.
And, working across villages and towns and communities across India. What I observed very closely was that the communities, the mothers and the children that really thrived, had great health outcomes, really had very healthy pregnancies, right? Were the communities where mothers got the right information at the right time in the right way in an extremely non-judgmental community voice, community manner, right? Doctors were intervening at the right time, again to basically, either administer the right medicines or the right folic acid or whatever, or even have them do the right tests, right? And that seed of an idea stayed with me. In fact, some of the interventions we ended up doing in terms of the operations plan from what we took away from the Gates Foundation and the McKinsey project, and that scaled across multiple countries. And what I took away was that, yes, the operations of it were working on a physical level. Was there a possibility to replicate that in a digital product and really scale it out, right? And that was really the seed of the idea behind BabyChakra. HBS, where I was at business school, and that's when it was kind of like all like germinating and gestating, to use a very relevant lingo here, was also the time, 2012 was the time, 2010 to 2012 was the time when I saw digital products really scaled, right? So Insta had just launched. Uber, the magic of Uber. You press a button and this amazing black cab came along, right? And cold Boston winters, it was like a lifesaver, right? We were just looking at food delivery apps. So we were looking at a lot of digital products in the US, and I had classmates from China, etc. I was also reading about stuff happening back in India. I was like, kuch kar sakte hai, like let's make something which is really large scale, a digital intervention to really transform the way mothers and fathers raise children today and, go through their own very critical care choices.
So it was quite an inflection point because there was a need that you saw which had coincided with the market, your idea. Ambition is something that always ran with you, within you. You would say that it was basically coming together a lot of factors, so to say?
It was. And I think a lot of serendipity as well. You talk about ambition, right? I mean, again, growing up, people would say I'm the least ambitious person they knew, perhaps, right? Because because ambition, if you look at it from, I was talking about this to someone this morning, right? When you're looking at the first 15 to 20 years of your life, right? It's a structured learning environment.
True.
And I don't really do well in those environments. It's something I've learned about myself, right? But in an unstructured learning environment, which frankly is life, where you get the opportunity to meet amazing people, learn from their experiences, kind of carve your own way, is where I found myself thriving, right? And in those conversations, when you meet amazing people, they in some sense set ambition for you. So I think I found my ambition for myself, the drive that I find myself have today, probably when I entered college,
Okay.
right? Because that's when it became a little more like unstructured, and that was when it was a little bit more open to talk to people, to figure out that everybody has their
You were
own.
closer to real life. so
I
to
was
say.
closer to real life, right?
Right.
So I think that's when I really started finding the roots to ambition and drive as I know it today.
At what point did you realize that there was something known as gender identity, gender role, and all of that and stuff as well?
Interesting question, because I never realized that actually till my first 3 years of college.
Got it.
I think in my fourth year, I stood for college president. I've shared the story many times, but that actually was an extremely important formative experience for me. And when I stood for college president, it came from that root of ambition, right? I'd met some amazing people. I'd done some amazing things in college. I was like, okay, I could be college president and really create impact in my community of college folks, right? But I was told that because I was a woman, and honestly, because I had a boyfriend, I couldn't actually stand for college president, apparently, right?
Okay.
And I used to get these nasty messages on my Nokia 3310. I used to get notes slipped under my dorm door saying, stand down, let the boy who was standing against me stand for college president. I lost a lot of friends, I think, in that journey. But I also found the friends who basically said, you
We
do
stand
what
by
you,
you.
we stand, and you do what you think is right for you and for your ambition. And so I stood and I won. And I think that taught me a very valuable lesson that sometimes, and it's not just about ambition, it's about when you know that you need to do something because it's the right answer for you, for what needs to be done, you will not probably do the most popular thing. You will probably go against the tide in many ways, and that's okay. I've taken that along with me in my journey.
And how do you navigate through any sort of gender-related issues that came by in your entrepreneurial journey? Because, see, BabyChakra as a concept of the business, yes, one intuitively believes that, okay, a woman could be running it well. But at the same time, it's also a function of STEM, because this is outside of the physical world. It goes into digital. Did you have to face any of those issues there?
So it's interesting, right? In the US, people entering, technology companies, so building technology companies, Airbnb was built by a bunch of designers, right? I mean, you have enough folks who are in product in like the top sort of tech companies who are actually women, and not just women, they come from very different backgrounds, right? They don't come from the typical engineering college, or they don't come from like an MIT necessarily. They come from very, very different diverse, like design schools and, liberal arts training and philosophy and, whatever have you, right? So in India, it has been different. I think early days, it was different. So I'm going to talk about two pieces to this, right? One was my gender, which is that, so I was a sole woman founder for, and have been like until very recently when we formed the Good Glamm Group, right? With Darpan, Priyanka and I. And there were obviously questions about what would happen when I became pregnant. And I was asked those questions. I walked into IC meetings like 8-9 months pregnant. Almost everything done, but then randomly told to come back like 3 months later because apparently things would change. When what would change except I would probably be, maybe a mother, right? But on the flip side, I mean, I also have seen incredible amount of support, Mangalam. And, I think what I've learned again from that journey is that, we tend to look a lot at the naysayers, the detractors. We have a whole bunch of promoters who are backing us and they're with us, right, through this journey. And they're actually talking about us in extremely positive ways when we don't even realize it, right? So I think as an entrepreneur, you can't be, of course, blind to a certain segment who might be, your detractors for a specific reason, but you have to hold on strong to your promoters, to your sponsors, to people who really believe in you and really have them in your journey. I think the second piece was, as I was alluding to, right? One was the gender piece. The other one was I'm not a traditional woman in tech. I did my undergrad in law. I went to McKinsey.
Exactly.
I went to business school, right? I mean, I've probably done all the things that you don't want to, you don't want to do like as a consumer tech founder, maybe, right? So I think that also took me some time. But, again, I think what I took away, and I was very naive, and I think that probably helped me out a lot because I was so naive and I'd talk to people and ask for help. Like I came back and I remember meeting a bunch of folks like Zishan and Bhavish, and I said, listen, help me build my tech team out. Like literally.
And that's a good thing.
It was a great thing because I had no shame and they realized that that's not like and I was new to the ecosystem. So people helped me build my team out. And as a result, and once you build out that core amazing team, right, then it's like this almost like this organism that keeps on growing, like organically, right? Because then they keep on attracting more and more talent. People hear about you. You put yourself out there, right? And I said, okay, what's my weak spot if I'm building a consumer tech play, right? I said, I need that credibility. So sab jagah apply kiya yaar, Google pe apply kiya, like Facebook, Mark Zuckerberg met me because he said, you built a fantastic consumer tech platform at scale, right? And those things actually establish credibility over time. So then of course, like the third thing I realized was, what can I do as a founder? So team, credibility for, consumer tech, and my, credibility, my personal credibility. And the third is consumer insight.
Right.
And, imagine I could sit with mothers at scale, with doctors at scale, because I had a certain amount of, my gender card played well there, I think. And also my background played well there. And I could actually sit and draw the wireframes, co-create the entire product flow, the UI, UX with my consumer. I mean, that was a superpower I realized later, right? You don't realize it when you're going through the motions, but there's so many benefits to, I think, the flip side of not having a traditional background.
Yeah, and as they say, the naysayers are always louder, but the yay guys, their supports are always there. They're silent and they're a lot more solid. And the unstructured learning that you were great at worked at the earlier parts of your career as well. But what's interesting is that, you speak about you having a very strong ecosystem around you through your early days, etc. Typically, as companies grow, as organizations grow, the leaders tend to get a little isolated, because then it also gets a little difficult for them to show their vulnerability. How is it in those situations where you keep it real and you keep that feedback mechanism going and you're ear to the ground?
I don't think we have an option. I mean, I don't think we have an option. See, I think it, the one thing I realize is there's no one leadership style. And I think HBS actually taught me that in spades, right? Because we went through a whole series of case studies, met a whole set of like protagonists, my entire class, we all were like, oh, we're the leaders of the future. Everybody had a different style, right? So I think what I've realized is that the leadership style that's most authentic to you is the correct leadership style for you, right? And for me, I know no other way, Mangalam, than to be extremely transparent with my teams. I know no other way. I mean, that's how I am. Of course, there might be some situations where, you don't want the team to get distracted by, I'll give you an example, right? For instance, when, we start of COVID, right? We had 2 term sheets. We were like, we're going to rock it. Like, we're going to get like this large amount of infusion and funding. Term sheets fell through. And I was struggling because, we only had 3 to 4 months of money left in the bank. And I think what ended up happening there was that I first started, of course, in a more sort of, I call it like the Christmas tree approach, right? I started by sharing this news in as transparent and as objective a manner without the emotion I was feeling initially with my top team. And I actually consulted them and said, hey, how would we deal with the situation? What advice do you have for me at this point in time? What can we do together? And then we reached a plan of action, which then over time, we then kind of syndicated very quickly with the rest of the team. Similarly, actually, when the BabyChakra and the MyGlamm merger was happening, and there's an HBS case study on that merger, interestingly enough.
That's such a wonderful full circle, right?
It is an amazing circle. And my entrepreneurship professor actually wrote it on us. It was really cool.
Wow.
So it actually talks about how we roped in and how I had to rope in. I wanted to rope in my leadership team, my, next level of leadership team, and really involve them in the decision making. It's a very big decision we were taking as a company.
Makes sense.
Right? And everybody had built the company out. So it had to be somewhat of a syndicated decision versus only an individual decision.
And how do you make decisions? I mean, what is your decision-making mechanism now? Because like we spoke at the start of the show, right? Not every decision has to have fully perfect information right in front of you. There are decisions that you have to take with imperfect information as well. Because if you wait for perfection, then the bus is gone.
I mean, not only is the bus gone, I think in business, you never have perfect data. You never have perfect information. And I think that is what you learn over time as an entrepreneur and as a team. That and oftentimes I tell my team, right, sometimes we're making decisions where it's actually our intuition or our gut, and we're justifying it with logic and data.
Got it.
Right? I mean, that's you lead with intuition
and gut. You want to give
gut.
me examples of some hits and misses?
Many.
Hits to many. I mean, everyone knows about the hits, but misses batao yaar thoda.
Misses bhi bahut hai. I mean, for instance, we launched a version of BabyChakra, and that was the whole time when there were a lot of Chinese investors investing in India, and like I was in very advanced talks with one of them, and they were talking about scale. And of course, like, this is pre-Geo, or like just at the inflection point of Geo. So we were seeing that with the women audience, the mother audience on BabyChakra, we were reaching a certain scale already, right? But to grow out exponentially, we're like, okay, maybe we could open out a men's part of BabyChakra, right? And there was a big belief, and I've always been a big champion of equal parenting, right? So like this is also akin to our value system as a company. My value system as a promoter, karte hain. And we opened out a separate sort of ecosystem on the same app for fathers to join. And we tried some performance marketing, some organic growth hacks, etc. We got in some really bad traffic, like really crap traffic, right? And of course, our numbers shot through the roof. In fact, even our engagement levels weirdly shot through the roof if you just look objectively at the numbers. But if you really looked at the quality, so, we talk a lot internally in the team about quality versus quantity. A classic example, right? Quantity in spades again. Quality was people saying, will you do friendship with me? Posting photos, right? And that's not what we were looking to do with BabyChakra. That's not the product we're trying to build, right? So it's a great investor story, maybe because if the investor's not looking deeply into the metrics and seeing really what's happening, but it's not like actually a value or a mission aligned story, correct? So big mistake there. And I'm accountable for that mistake because while my team said we need to go slow, I mean, I'm, again, ambition, right? So I'm like, let's grow the numbers, let's make it really big. And, ghar ghar BabyChakra, let's get the fathers involved. Fathers weren't coming in, some random people were coming in. So I think you learn along the way. And many mistakes like that have happened. And it's good learning.
It's very interesting that you speak about growth, ambition and all of that and stuff, because that brings me to a question on growth versus the principles that companies have. When there is so much funding at stake, when there is so much in terms of, the size of the organization, the ecosystem, etc. at stake, things turn to get a little toxic, so to say, in a lot of the startups. And I'm not necessarily saying that, Indian startups or specifying any of them, but there is a lot of temptation to perhaps, take some missteps, thinking that there is growth at the end of those missteps, or there is a higher paycheck that is coming in from a bunch of funds for that. They maybe tweak some of the numbers, tweak some of the parameters. How do you keep that temptation at bay at scale?
I mean, it's a very core question of values.
I mean, I understand it's a core question of values, but it also comes with a lot of privilege, right? A lot of people who might think of this as their only shot at getting funding.
It's a core question of values, honestly, Mangalam. I mean, we're seeing a lot play out in the ecosystem in India, internationally as well. You hear these stories, right? And I'm a founder. I have a lot of empathy for founders and founding teams and for, investors and stakeholders as well, right? I think it boils down to three stakeholders at the heart of it, right? One is, of course, your founder and the core founding team, right? And how they are thinking about what are they truly building, and why they're building what they're building, right? And therefore, who are the key stakeholders? Because I think there's a lot of this noise in the startup ecosystem कि हमको funding के लिए company बनानी है. नहीं यार, funding company को बनाती है.
Right.
Funding के लिए company नहीं बनानी, So I think that entire narrative, and I'm going to say this out loud, I think media is also very equally accountable for this.
Well,
like celebrating like funding journeys versus, and now of course we're changing that narrative, right? We're talking about amazing bootstrapped entrepreneurs. We're talking about people who've done like hard journeys, failed, I think that all is playing out now.
Right.
But for a very large time in the ecosystem, बहुत noise tha, right? So sometimes people may have gotten swayed. We're hoping that corrects itself. The second is the role of the board. We often talk about setting up a really strong board, but mostly if you think about it, who does the board comprise of? It comprises of like really young analysts, right? Who are maybe from like the VC community or the investors, right? And they may not have had the life experiences or even, I think, sometimes the emotional maturity. And that's normal, right? All of this comes with time and with experiences, right? To really understand what maybe when a company is going through, the valley of death and coming out of it, like what does that look like emotionally, physically, mentally for the team, for the founders, and how do you even sort of calibrate that and help people come out of it, right? So I think the board construct is super important and accountability of the board is super important, and I can't emphasize that enough, right? It can't just be a bunch of people only investing in the fund aspect and the monetary aspect of it. It has to be people who understand the business intuitively, understand the promoters, and understand where the business can go and the journeys it'll go through, right? And I think the third sort of stakeholder is honestly the ecosystem at large.
Yeah.
We are all peers to each other as entrepreneurs, right? And I think the great thing about Indian entrepreneurs, and I've experienced it firsthand, is people are there willing to help and willing to lend a ear. However, I think with the younger lot, maybe what we're doing is that it becomes a little bit tougher to reach out to them, or they feel intimidated reaching out to some of us who've been through the journeys where things seem like there's no coming back from this, right? I think it's a lot on us as entrepreneurs, as an ecosystem, to reach out to founders when you can kind of see that there's signs of them struggling. Or even before that, ideally, to preempt some of these choices being made, because eventually we're such a nascent ecosystem, Mangalam.
Yeah.
We have no option but to succeed, of course, but also succeed not at all costs, but succeed in an extremely values-driven way. Otherwise, you won't see the capital come in, and you won't see, like, domestic capital started trusting us now, right?
I mean,
it's not going to happen.
On
Retail
that
investors
itself-
won't happen, right? So where will the exits come? Where will the capital infusion come? It won't happen. So we have no option but to kind of ensure that things are done in a certain way where the trust in the ecosystem is not destroyed.
So on that, I'd like you to chime in on the investor community as well, because a
Yeah.
lot of them are chasing growth, numbers. Like you said, they'd be objectively looking at some of the numbers that you did for the male BabyChakra. They would be happy with that. So if a particular strategy isn't working, how is it that you have a communication, an honest communication with your investors through that, and how do you expect them to react? Just tell us a little about how investors who are constantly gunning for numbers or gunning for growth or the objectives that they had for the company, how do you tell them that, okay, this is not working now?
So, Mangalam, I think it goes back to the period of time that we all saw ourselves way back in 2020, 2021, right? And you're very familiar with that. Liquidity rush, right? And the valuations.
Yeah.
People were raising at valuations that didn't justify what the ground reality in India was, right? And the market potential in India, or like the time it would take to justify the exits that people would expect from their investments, right? And at that valuation in that finite period. There are three variables, right? The amount of money you put in the exit valuation or the exit outcome, and the time in which this happens, right? I mean, that's like a perfect storm. It's like a pressure cooker.
Right.
And we have all created it. I think all of us created it, right? So I think now there's a lot more sanity. And not just in India, but across the world.
Right.
And it's welcome sanity. It's not growth at all costs. It is growth. You have to grow. If you're an insurgent play, you have to grow because, you have to prove. That's how we do it. But I think it's not growth at all costs, right? There's growth with looking at profitability, looking at strong product market fit, looking at customer love, looking at solving a real need, looking at sustainable growth in time as well, right? So I think that's now changing in the conversations we are seeing play out. We saw it happen differently before, and that's why we find ourselves where we are today.
Got it. And the final question then is that crisis that defines leadership, that defines the values of an organization, and that if an organization can retain its core values and its sanity through crisis, that this one is for the keeps. You did speak about the COVID period, but can you tell us a little about some other crises that you guys faced and something that you're proud of as a leader of having navigated that?
So we've been fortunate. I mean, it's not really been that we've had major crisis, and I'm touching wood as I speak, right? And that's been I think a big blessing. I mean, COVID, honestly, for all of us, and including, by the way, for Darpan at MyGlamm at that point in time, Priyanka at PopXO, me at BabyChakra, all of us were going through our own individual crisis, and we came together and we kind of saw actually, the 1 + 1 become 11. So it became really positive post that, and we were able to kind of not buck COVID, but we saw some very positive trends after that, right? But, I think coming back to your question on how to deal with crisis, right? Honestly, every day is crisis in an entrepreneur's life, right? You go to sleep thinking sab kuch upset hai, morning utte ho and your phone is on fire, right? It really is like that. So I think the three things I've learned in my journey is that, see, as an entrepreneur, you have to constantly prioritize crisis, right? There's small crisis, there's large crisis, right? And then focus attention for team and yourself accordingly, right? And number two, I think deal with every crisis with some level of equanimity. Because, like I said, every day is a crisis, right? You're losing top talent. That's a big crisis in itself in your product company, right? So what do you do then? You have to basically take each day as it comes. And whatever the crisis, just be equanimous about it. And try to find that space in the day where you kind of decompress, you kind of reflect, you kind of analyze what could have gone differently. You have a feedback session with yourself and the team the next day, right? To figure out, or a week later, till the crisis kind of blows over. And the third is to be very transparent about it,
right?
And transparent thoughtfully, correct? So I think if it's a crisis that impacts, for instance, consumers, or it impacts, for instance, your team or whatever.
Define the crisis, basically.
Yeah, you define the crisis. Then you have to basically think and say that, okay, I need to first of all tell people that this crisis is happening, right? Because it can't be that you're caught napping. I mean,
Right.
and even though you know about it, you have to talk about it as a leader, right?
Got it.
So I think the most important thing is transparently communicate that this seems to be happening. We're on it. And we'll come back to you at the earliest, right? Once you do that, then you also get a little bit of time to solve for it in an effective way, in a way that actually solves for it in a deep-rooted manner versus having a band-aid solution to it, right? So once you get that time, then you kind of solve for it, yeah? And I think that's what really, crisis management is about. I mean, we've done enough of these case studies. We see enough of this play out in real life as well. And honestly, I'm saying this is the three sort of pieces I see play out for
Yes.
myself right now. If there's a really large, God forbid, a crisis in future, I'm sure it'll evolve to meet the needs of that crisis. But I think these three are basics. I think they are applicable across any crisis, large or small.
Yeah, and you defined it. Marketing or business is all about the 4 Ps, and
Yeah.
one C, the 4 Ps: place, product, promotion, and price.
Yeah.
But the big C is communication itself. And on your time itself, because you said that you have to define the nature of the problem, define whether it's the here and now problem or a future problem, etc. How do you define how do you plan your day in terms of how much time are you going to devote to the here and now problem, and how much of that is a strategic problem, strategy decisions? How do you spend that?
Honestly, my time is not divided on a daily basis. It's more divided on a weekly basis.
Got it.
Right? So on a weekly basis, I pretty much kind of calendar in saying that this is what I want to spend time on like my regular ops, figuring out how my operations are going on certain fronts, right? Here's the amount of time I want to spend in terms of, thinking about what's going to happen next quarter.
Right.
Here's the time I want to spend in terms of like partnerships that will help me strategically, many, many months later, right? As entrepreneurs today, we're not living 5 years down the line, right? We're
Right.
living like 1 year
Quarter
at
to
best.
quarter.
Yeah, and quarter to quarter is real, right?
Yeah.
So that's how I pretty much divide my week. What ends up happening is I've also started, blocking a lot of time for just myself,
Got it.
where I'm sitting and I'm trying to figure out, okay, what are the trends? What should I be learning about? What do I need to apply in my business? What do we need to apply in our product, NPD strategy, whatever, right? Different strategies, go-to-market strategies, growth strategies. So I think those personal times to like basically figure this out and have to have conversations or read or whatever is needed, right, has also given me time for addressing any small crisis that comes along
Right.
in that journey, right? Because then I can at least factor that in. I think this whole thing about this busy, hustle, I think is overrated now. I really think it's overrated. I think I think we're all extremely busy. We all are extremely
Right.
pressed for time. But I think you need to figure out how do you make time to think for the next phase or whatever it is you're building. Because if you just live in the here and now, then you'll just keep on doing incremental changes. There won't be
Yeah,
delta
you'll be on a
changes.
treadmill. You'll be running, but you won't reach anywhere. How do you? So I'm tempted to ask, what are you thinking of right now from growth, long-term strategy standpoint?
International. So that's the next phase for us. So we've already launched in the GCC, and that's been a great launch. So we're looking at new markets and new geographies, and that is completely top of mind for us.
Are you also looking at a new set of investors, perhaps retail, maybe an IPO?
So IPO will happen when we're ready.
Right.
And it'll take us some time. I mean, it takes time for companies to get ready for public offerings, right? So it'll take us time. But I think right now we're focused on profitability. We're looking at new geographies, and we continue to sort of really bolster our presence here in India, which is our primary market.
Perfect. Naiyya, this was great conversation. Thank you so much for joining in. You gave us a whole host of things, not just at MyGlamm and BabyChakra, but it's a lot of insight that a lot of people who would be in their entrepreneurial journeys right now would draw from this conversation. And thank you for giving back to the ecosystem.
My pleasure, Mangalam. Always a pleasure talking to you.
All right. So on that note, what we'll do is I hope that this lesson that you've taken from here, this episode, is that knowing your journey is not defined by the dilemmas you face, but more importantly, by the resilience and ambition that you have to tackle them itself. So keep asking tough questions and embracing the ambitious spirit, as Naiyya spoke about. It propels you forward. And then join me on the next episode where we discuss why your story is your strategy. Until then, it's me, Mangalam Maloo, signing off.
IVM.